Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that?
Because
that is something that no president
I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I give him the space to negotiate.
Okay, real talk. The Sterling lens is back, and Maya Sterling is in the building. And today's clip is one of those ones where you watch a man get asked a simple yes or no question and spend 4 minutes doing everything humanly possible to avoid answering it. Scott Jennings is back on Abby Phillip's CNN panel, and Tara Setmayer and Bobby Ghosh come loaded with a straightforward demand. Just condemn the threat to annihilate an entire civilization. That is it. One sentence. And watching Jennings twist himself into a pretzel to avoid those 4 words tells you everything about what the Republican Party has become under Trump. Abby Phillip pins him down at the end, and it is genuinely one of the cleanest moments of on-air accountability I have seen in a while. Subscribe if you are new here, and let's get into it.
Right, a question about American values. After President Trump warned that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, he has since delayed that threat now for 2 weeks, but it still sent shockwaves all over the world, including the Vatican.
Today, as we all know, there was also this threat against all the people of Iran. This is truly unacceptable. There are certainly issues of international law here, but much more. It's a moral issue, for the good of the people entirely.
The Pope has been weighing in on this conflict for a while now, but I think you described it as a genocidal threat. Other people have described it that way. I mean, there's this debate always, should you take Trump literally or seriously? But whether you take him literally or seriously, saying that you're going to end a civilization is a serious threat that no American president has ever issued before.
And you shouldn't. And honestly, those sorts of things when just really are very unhelpful. But I would also say we're not unaccustomed to him doing this. He did it with respect to North Korea. He said similar things with respect to China. He's made bluffs with respect to Canada. He's done it over and over again. And every time that he does this, I find that the media is running around chasing its tail with respect to him. I get he's the president of the United States. He should not be saying any of that sort of thing. And it's wrong. It is absolutely wrong. At the same time, how many times are we going to do this with this guy? I mean, why? I mean, why are we engaging?
You can blame the media, but it's also
so the onus is on us to say, oh, well, we'll just ignore him because he's making statements like a mad king. So we just normalize it as, well, that's just Trump being Trump and move on. Is this someone that you would tell your kids that you should look up to this guy and believe what he says, with the president of the United States, or just, well, you can go around and say whatever you want and threaten to, annihilate civilizations and just, it's the media chasing its tail every time he says something like that.
No, in fact, I've said exactly the opposite to my kids. I have said exactly the opposite.
I'm glad.
Yes,
so why is the standard different for the president of the United States? You wouldn't let your kids get away with talking like that.
Because it's happened over and over and over again. Yes, and he wasn't. He is the president of the United States.
Job
so
to hold him accountable
you have to actually deal with what you have.
Right.
And what we're dealing right now is with a president that, again, I take the view, and I know it's a minority view, what he has done with respect to Iran has been good for society. It's been good for the world. Hamas has been degraded. Hezbollah has been degraded. The Iranian military, the nuclear, it is an evil nation state. I look at the long game rather than a bunch of talking heads.
We're not, like I said, we're doing the service to Mad Kings. Mad Kings haven't said things like that since going back to Genghis Khan. True. This is not even unprecedented in modern times. It was unprecedented even in medieval times to say things like this. And what a president says matters. It's not enough to say, well, that's just Trump, and let's not chase our tails around this. When we have politicians at this table. When politicians speak, what they say, the way they say it matters and ought to matter. When I was a child and came home and if I used a profanity, my parents didn't say, that's just Bobby being Bobby and we could go on with that. I got my punishment for that. And the president should not get a free pass. He's an 80-year-old man. He's a grown adult. He cannot be just simply brushed. This kind of behavior, this kind of language cannot simply be brushed away. A civilization? For crying out loud. We're not even allowed to say that about a town or a village. We're not supposed to use language like that. George Bush went to Iraq and he used very different language. The language, I covered that war. And it was not a war I was in support of, but I covered it as a journalist in Baghdad for 5 years. I distinctly remember George Bush saying, we come to Iraq with respect for your civilization, with respect for the faiths that are practiced here. There's a difference. Presidential language goes down in history.
Agreed.
And that's got to count for something, and we cannot simply brush this away like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't have any respect for the government, for this regime, but I'll tell you, unhinged and unhelpful is the only way when you read something like that and you say, how does this advance the ball forward? Mm-hmm. And also, there's only so many times you can cry wolf and say things like that are so extreme and crazy where people just blow you off, including other world leaders, and don't take you seriously. And I think the more this, yes, we're desensitized, you're right, and that's not a good thing. And by the way, a little language, I'm from Jersey, so a little's okay.
I just want to read this because this is conservative commentator Orrin Cass. He's close to Vice President J.D. Vance. He says, simply put, what is the point of all of this? If these are empty threats that we all know he will not carry out, then they are ineffective threats. The Iranians are on X too, and merely making the president and our nation look foolish. If they're not empty threats, and the president is asserting the American position that such actions are acceptable in this situation and ones that we are willing to take. We are not living in some quantum thought experiment where he is simultaneously is and is not serious.
I don't agree that he's made empty threats as it relates to Iran.
This is literally an empty threat.
I don't think the people that we decapitated at the top of their regime would call them empty threats either. I mean, we've clearly demonstrated the interest in using the U.S. military to take drastic action.
All of the shifting deadlines.
Right.
What do you call the threat this morning to end their civilization, only to accept a 10-point plan that was put on the table yesterday as the basis for negotiations?
You haven't seen the 10-point plan, A. All we know is that they said they would reopen the strait. Beyond that, we don't know anything.
Hold on a second. The president retweeted the Iranian foreign minister's statement, which said explicitly that they are using the 10-point plan as a basis of negotiation. I'm not making that up. The president reiterated that on an ex post, Scott.
But I have
so my point is the threats from Trump
and some of the stuff that's
to bomb their bridges, to bomb their desalination plants, to bomb them out of their civilization off the face of the earth. How are those not empty threats?
Well, it looks like it brought them to the table tonight and got them in a place where they would agree to a ceasefire. I mean, I'll give you a counter argument to all these other positions, which is
that is not connected to reality.
We have a ceasefire.
Tel Aviv is still under attack.
The same table that we have tonight is the table that existed yesterday, in large part. And fundamentally, the only thing that has been agreed to is that Iran will continue to control the Strait of Hormuz and will allow ships to go through on their control. That is the only thing that has been agreed to.
The strait is going to be reopened, and we're going to negotiate about the rest. Beyond that, we don't really know much of anything. But I will tell you, yesterday, Iran was saying, we're cutting off, talks. We're not going to continue the talks. The president uses some extreme language, and all of a sudden, voila, tonight, we have a ceasefire for 2 weeks. Why can't we just say, you know what? Maybe we have achieved military objectives. Maybe we have taken down their military and their ability to export terror. Maybe we have decimated their missiles. Maybe we've buried the nuclear material. And maybe we've got 2 weeks to make the world a safer place. Why can't we look at this as a glass half full moment as opposed to,
but then why
we have to make it negative for Donald Trump.
But why can't you just acknowledge that what Donald Trump said this morning was abhorrent and that no president should ever threaten annihilating a civilization? Why can't you just acknowledge that?
Look, he's talking to them in the way he thinks he needs to talk to them.
Why can't you acknowledge that? That is something that no president of the United States should say.
Because I don't take orders from you, number one, and number two, I give him the space to negotiate with the Iranians the best way he knows how.
All right, well, let me just ask one final, question, Scott, for the record. Do you think it's acceptable for the president to threaten to annihilate a civilization?
I think it's acceptable for the commander-in-chief to deal with these people in the best way that he can.
Is that a yes or is it a no?
Result.
Is that a yes or is it a no?
So that's a yes.
Is that a yes or a no?
I'm not going to second guess
him.
So
it's a yes.
He put out a statement. We now have a ceasefire. Okay. Those are the two things
I just wanted to ask for the record.
Yes.
That's a yes on your part. Yeah. We'll leave it there.
All right, let's break this all the way down, because what happened in that panel is not just a cable news moment. It is a window into exactly how democratic norms get eroded in real time and how the people responsible for protecting those norms become the instruments of destroying them. Let's start with the actual statement that launched this entire debate, because it needs to be stated plainly and not buried under spin. The President of the United States threatened to end an entire civilization. Not a government, not a military, a civilization. 70 million people. Their history, their culture, their children, their future, all of it. And he posted it publicly on social media like it was a Tuesday morning thought. The Pope weighed in. The Vatican called it a moral issue for the good of all people. Conservative commentator Orrin Cass, a man close to J.D. Vance, said plainly that the statement either means nothing, in which case it makes America look foolish, or it means something, in which case it is a declaration that annihilating a civilization is an acceptable American position. Those are the only two options. There is no third door. And yet Scott Jennings spent the entire segment trying to find one. Now, let's talk about Scott Jennings, specifically because his performance in this clip is not just frustrating television. It is a case study in what complicity actually looks like in practice. He was asked one question, a simple binary, yes or no question. Do you think it is acceptable for the president to threaten to annihilate a civilization? That is the question. And he could not say no. He would not say no. Instead, he said he would not second-guess the commander-in-chief, which is not an answer to the question that was asked. Nobody asked him whether Trump's strategy worked. Nobody asked him to evaluate the diplomatic outcome. Nobody asked him to second-guess anything. They asked him whether threatening to wipe out 70 million people is acceptable behavior for an American president. And his answer was essentially yes, because a ceasefire happened. That logic is so dangerous it needs to be named clearly. What Jennings is arguing is that the ends justify the means, regardless of what the means are. That as long as you can point to any outcome and call it positive, the method used to get there is beyond criticism. That is not a conservative principle. That is not an American principle. That is the logic of authoritarianism dressed up in a cable news blazer. And Bobby Ghosh's point about presidential language is one that deserves far more weight than it got in that segment. He covered the Iraq War in Baghdad for 5 years. He was there. And he specifically remembered George W. Bush, a president who launched a war that killed hundreds of thousands of people, and that Ghosh himself opposed. Say explicitly that America came to Iraq with respect for its civilization and its faith. Now you can argue about the gap between that language and those actions. That gap is real, and it is enormous. But the point Ghosh is making is about something specific. Presidential language is permanent. It enters the historical record. It signals to the world and to history what America believes about other peoples and their right to exist. When an American president says a civilization will end and never be brought back again, that statement does not disappear when the news cycle moves on. It lives in the record. It lives in the memory of the people who were threatened. It lives in the calculations of every other nation watching to see what America considers acceptable. The normalization argument is not about being oversensitive to Trump's bluster. It is about understanding that words from the most powerful office on earth have consequences that outlast the moment they are spoken. The ceasefire argument that Jennings keeps leaning on also deserves direct scrutiny because it is the only substantive defense he offers, and it does not actually hold up. His claim is that Trump's genocidal rhetoric brought Iran to the table and produced a ceasefire. Therefore, the rhetoric was justified and effective. But Tara Setmayer and Bobby Ghosh both point out what the ceasefire actually consists of at this moment. Iran maintains control of the Strait of Hormuz. Ships pass on Iran's terms. The parties agreed to use an existing 10-point plan as a basis for negotiation. That is it. That is the ceasefire. Nothing was resolved. No nuclear program was dismantled. No lasting security arrangement was reached. The Houthis were still being bombed as the panel was having this conversation. So what Jennings is pointing to as vindication for threatening to end a civilization is essentially a 2-week pause with the same table that existed the day before. That is not a triumph of extreme rhetoric. That is a temporary de-escalation of a situation that extreme rhetoric helped create and inflame in the first place. There is also something important in what Tara Setmayer raises about the cry-wolf problem that goes beyond just this moment. When a president threatens to end civilizations on a regular enough basis, the world starts to discount it. Other leaders, adversaries, allies, all of them start running their own calculations about what is real and what is performance. And that erosion of credibility has consequences that are not visible in the moment but accumulate over time. When America actually needs its threats to be believed, when there is a genuine red line that genuinely matters, the credibility to back it up has been spent on truth social posts about annihilating people. This is not a hypothetical concern. It is a documented pattern in international relations. Credibility is a finite resource, and this administration is burning through it daily. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to and that I think is the most important takeaway from this entire clip. Scott Jennings knows all of this. He is not uninformed. He is not genuinely confused about whether threatening to destroy a civilization is acceptable presidential behavior. He teaches at a university. He has worked in Republican politics for decades. He understands norms, and he understands what their erosion means. And he goes on television night after night and defends the indefensible anyway. That is a choice. It is a deliberate, compensated, conscious choice to provide cover for behavior he almost certainly knows is wrong. And that kind of deliberate complicity is in many ways more corrosive than the behavior itself, because it gives the behavior institutional legitimacy. When a respected political commentator refuses to say that threatening genocide is unacceptable, it tells the audience that maybe it is not so unacceptable after all. That is the function Jennings serves, not analysis cover. And Abby Phillip deserves real credit for what she did at the end of that segment. She did not let him slither out with another answer. She pinned it down on the record. Is that a yes or a no? And when he refused to say no, she said clearly, for the record, that is a yes, and we will leave it there. That is journalism doing exactly what it is supposed to do. not accepting the performance of an answer as an actual answer, making the refusal itself the news, because his refusal to condemn a threat to annihilate 70 million people is the story, and she made sure it was recorded as such. This is what the Sterling lens exists for, to make sure that when something this significant happens in a panel, discussion on cable news, it does not just get processed as another heated debate and forgotten by the next morning. The President of the United States threatened to end a civilization. A prominent Republican commentator refused to say that was wrong. Both of those things happened, and both of them matter. If this one hit home, share it, because these moments need more eyes, not fewer. Subscribe if you are not already here, because we are not letting any of this slide past without examination. Drop in the comments. Do you think there is any line Trump could cross that would finally cause people like Scott Jennings to break publicly? Or do you think the calculation to stay loyal is just permanently locked in at this point? I want to know what you think. Stay sharp. I will see you in the next one.